specifically its counter. Now, before we dive too deep into that, let's look at the basic 3 elements of magic that Frieren teaches Fern in the second episode. A spell is made up by the strength in which it's cast, the mana expended, and the control over said mana that's exhibited. Now, extending that rule, and while Fern is initially confident, when it actually comes time to pull the trigger and shoot the illusion of her loved one, who is being represented as Hyder, she can't do it. She hesitates. Frieren, however, doesn't, and to her surprise, instead of her old master Flamma showing up like the last time she had run into an Einzem, this time the Einzem shows her Himmel. There are so many
Today we're going to be discussing the idea of power systems. For those of you who know, in fiction, power systems come in 2 orders. You got your softcore magic system and your hardcore magic systems. And today we're going to explore what power system is Frieren and how it does take inspiration from science. Let's get straight to the video.
Ever think about magic in media? It's kind of everywhere, and it's not always what it looks like. There's obvious examples, like Harry Potter has magic. What a shock. But lightsabers? Magic. Chakra in Naruto? Magic. The sword fighting in Demon Slayer? Actually, maybe not magic.
It's just the power system.
But also kind of magic depending on how you define it, just not in the way that it seems. Yeah, that one's confusing. But what differentiates a good from a bad magic system in a show or movie? Mostly whether or not it does its job. But that's where things get complicated. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about one trick that can make almost any magic system feel more realistic. Let's start first with defining magic. It's kind of a catch-all term to refer to anything that's beyond our understanding of our physical world. It can come from a divine, arcane, or natural source. But for today's video, let's talk about magic as if it was a system. There are 2 popular types of magic systems as literary devices, soft and hard magic. And essentially what differentiates the 2 is how structured they are, and also how well that structure is conveyed to the audience. Theoretically, what seems like a soft magic system could be a hard magic system, but never explained. Lord of the Rings is a great example of this. Technically speaking, it's a hard magic system based off of the author's perspective, but for the audience, it functions as a soft magic system because it's not given much of an explanation. Now in stories, I heavily prefer hard magic systems, and what I'm advocating in this video is that one of the best ways to make a hard magic system is making it feel like science. So that leads us to the next point. What is science? If we were to oversimplify, science is a system of deliberate observation in order to better understand the world around us. You've heard of the scientific method. And if magic were to exist in the world, I think it would make a lot of sense that we would observe it in the same way we do science. But this can potentially lead to a major contradiction. What's the point of magic in a story? I'd argue like any other component, it's made to serve the main plot line or purpose of the story you're telling. It can create interesting conflict or setting, but something mostly inherent to magic is its ability to evoke the fantastic. Mostly magic is introduced to stories because it's incredibly intriguing. While some prefer a more realistic or historic backdrop, creating a fictional story allows you the opportunity to set it in any world you want to. The only limit is your imagination, so people let that imagination run wild. Now, if you were to ask the average consumer whether or not they think of science as boring or exciting, I think the answers would definitely skew towards boring, because the process of applying science is very rigorous and demanding. It's not the easiest thing to romanticize, but that's not to say that no one's made science fun. Science fiction is an incredibly established and well-explored genre, but even in most science fiction, they tend to dumb down the science to the point where it feels like its own magic system. So where's the contradiction? Well, I'm advocating that a great way to make a hard magic system is to make it feel like a science. But if you go too far, you're leaning into, I think, a generally speaking very boring thing to explore in stories. But that's the beauty of writing fiction, because good magic systems tend to be easy to understand. And generally speaking, there's actually a very easy equation for writers to factor in when determining whether or not to make something more or less complicated. If it's complex, make it worth it. Like I stated in previous videos, one of the main jobs of creating stories is keeping your audience engaged. And the better you are at what you do, the more patient your audience will be. Which leads us to the subject of today's video, Frieren Beyond Journey's End. Frieren's magic system is far from my favorite part of the show, but I do love the way it engages in the story, and specifically how it serves the promises made in the first couple episodes of what the story is going to be. There are 2 really cool examples of this in the first 5 episodes. The first is the story of Zoltra, aka Basic Offensive Magic, and the second is the magical equivalent of an anglerfish. While we're technically introduced to Zoltra in the second episode, it's expanded upon in the second half of the third episode when Frieren is teaching Fern both Zoltra and, more specifically, its counter. Now, before we dive too deep into that, let's look at the basic 3 elements of magic that Frieren teaches Fern in the second episode. A spell is made up by the strength in which it's cast, the mana expended, and the control over said mana that's exhibited. Now, extending that rule to defensive magic, we understand that to cast defensive magic costs a huge amount of mana. It's the only way to prevent Zoltra from piercing through. Because of that, mages have established the strategy and meta of carefully placing defensive magic to prevent Zoltra's attack. There's a clear balance to the entire dynamic. So this is where Zoltra's origin comes into play and how it sets the tone for the rest of the series. Zoltra was invented by the great demon mage Qual, someone so powerful that Frieren had to seal him away as her and her party couldn't actually defeat him. The story eventually leads to Fern and Frieren returning to the site where Qual was sealed, the magic now becoming unstable. And while there's a couple things that foreshadow this moment that make it so good, this scene in fact is also foreshadowing for a major theme that'll come back up later in the story. But we'll get to that in a second. Let's start first with how this scene is foreshadowed. The first is that training scene where Frieren is teaching Fern the basics of magic theory practically, explaining both basic offensive and defensive magic and how they're used. The second is the way Frieren is urging Fern to read up on theory. Fern undermines the value of the tome at the beginning of the episode, and she finds herself doing something that I do constantly, which is dragging your feet or ignoring a basic task because the importance doesn't quite resonate. The night before unsealing Qual, Frieren explains to Fern how deadly he was as a mage, specifically because of the killing magic he invented, Zoltra. But the moment that makes this all incredibly interesting is when we finally have the confrontation between the two parties, and we learn that basic offensive magic is Zoltra, this crazy legendary spell that was so deadly it changed the entire landscape of magic, and now it's antiquated. The power it gave an individual mage was so great that they needed an immediate solution, so they developed a counter, and that in turn caused the entire landscape of magic to evolve. It's how a lot of development actually happens, and when magic systems properly capture that evolution of a meta, it adds a lot to the system. Because essentially what you want with any magic system is approachable depth that serves the story. And what makes Frieren's magic system so good is the way it plays into the story. It's not my favorite, but it's executed remarkably well. Not only is this an interesting idea that creates a more developed world surrounding our characters, it also directly relates to both Frieren and Fern's arc. Because while the story at times is an outstanding character drama, it's also a remarkable fantasy adventure. What inspired this video?
I do want to just pause it here, purely because I always learn so much from these videos, but it is true. The power of these systems has to balance well with the world building established, but also act as the macrocosm of the character's journey and showing what the character, which takes apart the internal mind of our protagonist, the protagonists who use it and how they use it throughout the world. And by having a power system, what effectively is the will of the person coming to real life, having a hard power system, but in this basis makes it really refreshing and makes the world really feel whole and complete. Naturally, the technicalities of the magic systems I'm not too familiar with, and it takes a lot of understanding of it to really delve into. So I do implore anyone to really go in to look at hardcore systems and softcore systems by this one author. I can't remember his name, but he does a really good in-depth origin of what it is. And also, if anyone has watched Hello Future Me, he does a lot of writing techniques. He has an amazing video on what that is. And maybe in the future, we might even watch that video just so we get a better understanding of magic systems moving forward for future analysis.
This scene in the 5th episode. Because in a lot of ways in my first watch through, it didn't stand out to me. But in revisiting it, it was remarkable how much this scene served different ideas in the story. And it's also incredibly interesting from a writing standpoint. There's this concept in art that's talked a lot about that there's no such thing as a completely original idea. Every story is based off of some form of storytelling structure. There are likely exceptions to that rule. Something to remember is that almost all storytelling rules and structures aren't meant to be absolute. They're generally applicable, and generally speaking, almost all stories are influenced by other stories. A cool metaphor I've heard to exemplify this is human beings share 99.9% of their DNA with one another, but there's such a range of different expression in individuals with that 0.1% difference. Stories are the same. Small changes can lead to drastically different narratives.
Interesting.
So something that can lead to actually incredibly fun magic systems is to take scientific references and then create your own magical version. In this case with Frieren, I think that they took the anglerfish and made their own cool magical version. And then not only that, but the magical version played into the story. So in episode 5, there's this town that Frieren and Fern visit that has people disappearing after seeing ghosts. Some have escaped and they can share their story. So before Frieren reveals that the monster is called an Einzum, Fern demonstrates that she's been studying more magical theory and is able to accurately identify it before they run into it. It shows people someone they've lost that they hold dear to them as a way of luring them into a trap. Strong concentrations of magic disrupt the illusion. So essentially, in order for them to counter this monster, they have to shoot their loved ones, or at least a phantom version of their loved ones. And while Fern is initially confident, when it actually comes time to pull the trigger and shoot the illusion of her loved one, who is being represented as Hyder, she can't do it. She hesitates. Frieren, however, doesn't, and to her surprise, instead of her old master Flamma showing up like the last time she had run into an Einzum, this time the Einzum shows her Himmel. There are so many levels in which this is working, and it's all kind of bookended by the fact that these monsters are feeding off of their victims' memories. So Himmel's facade acts in line with the way he would in real life, and he tells Frieren to shoot him, because that's what Himmel would do. This scene offers so much more than I had initially realized. And more than anything, it represents this larger concept of why I think Frieren's magic system is so well founded. These two examples and numerous others make Frieren's magic system feel like a science. It adds so much to the world building, but more than anything, it serves the purpose of the story. Just like so many different aspects of Frieren as a show, it's so multifaceted. And man, I just love it. Thanks for watching. This video is the 8th in a running series called Exploring Frieren. If you enjoyed it, go check out some of the previous ones or come back next week. My video next week is going to be talking about the introduction of one of the main characters.
I like this content creator page. His artistic approach to storytelling and poetic nature makes it really engaging. Naturally, this theme is very hard to truly understand, and like I said, might be do a video later on to truly explore the depths of what hard and soft magic system is. But Frieren, once again, does a really phenomenal way of taking a hard power system but making it so feel like a soft system, and all part of how it's beautifully crafted a world with strong characters, strong world building, and even a strong power system, almost like the trifecta of what makes great writing. And that's just Frieren, an amazing story with an amazing everything. But that was the video for today. Like, comment, subscribe, and until next time, ciao.